It's make or break time for Desmond Ridder. We'll be discussing that on today's Week 17 crossover Thursday with Locked On Cardinals host Alex Clancy.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to a crossover Thursday. I am Aaron Freeman, host of Locked On Falcons, joined as usual for these crossover Thursdays with the host of the opposite show, and that is, of course, Alex Clancy of Locked On Cardinals. And today's crossover Thursday is presented by our friends over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks is so much fun. It's easy to play. You're not competing against other players. It's just you versus the projections. Just pick 2 to 5 players, and if they score more or less than their Prize Picks projection, you can win up to 10 times your money on your entry. It literally takes less than 60 seconds to enter. It's that easy. We love Prize Picks. We know you'll love them too. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 at sign up with the promo code Locked On. That's prizepicks.com, promo code Locked On. So, Alex, as we jump into this crossover Thursday, previewing this Falcons Cardinals Week 17 matchup, I know, not a whole lot going on this season for each of these teams. It's all about, okay, what's going to happen next year. I know for the Falcons, though, their big storyline heading into this game is sort of on that notion, but it's kind of about this week because this kind of is the most winnable game for Desmond Ridder if he's going to finish this season strong. The Cardinals seem like a favorable matchup. One of the things that, I've been paying attention to these last couple of weeks is sort of the slow starts that the Falcons have gotten off to under Desmond Ridder, and that's something we've talked about going back to his days at Cincinnati. But slow starts have not been exclusive to Desmond Ridder this year for the Falcons. They've gotten off to slow starts throughout when Marcus Mariota was a quarterback. But I noticed the Cardinals also are a team that aren't known for starting fast. So even if Ridder gets off to another sort of trademark slow start, this is probably the team where you could afford that, because I'm looking at the numbers and Arizona's only scored 9 points on the road this year in the first quarter. That's dead last in the NFL. They're 28th in road points in the second quarter. So they're not a team that starts fast. So if the Falcons get off to another slow start, that's not a bad thing. This kind of, to me, is Desmond Ridder's, breakout's probably not the right word, but like if he's going to show that he can be the starter for the Falcons in 2023, this is probably the game where he should look the best. I'm curious from your perspective, do you agree with that? And sort of what for you is what the Arizona Cardinals are playing for in this Week 17 game?
Yeah, it's interesting because, Desmond Ridder, if on paper translates, like he was somebody you rooted for in college. It was Cincy, it wasn't a top flight school, and he was able, you saw his evolution as a quarterback, namely as a passing quarterback his last year, because you knew he could run the ball. He was Taysom Hillish, and then he was able to, he showed his touch in his last year in college, and we saw it a little bit last week. I always say this, having a bountiful amount of young, good quarterbacks is what makes the NFL so great. They're children. These guys are young men who are exemplary at their craft, and seeing him grow, that's what I'm going to be watching, from the sideline, because, you've got the young generation of Drake London and Kyle Pitts, they're just on the roster in general. And if you have somebody that could take over and have a higher ceiling than what Marcus Mariota's has been pretty much since he came into the league, that's a huge thing for the future of the Falcons. And for the Cardinals, talking about the future, I'm not sure, for those who didn't watch the Cardinals game on Christmas, Cliff Kingsbury looked like he got coal in his stocking before the game started. It's like he looks like a defeated man, and I feel bad for Cliff Kingsbury. Aaron, you know very well, as does every other host on this platform, that I'm not a Cliff Kingsbury fan. Yeah. But it's never a direct attack at the person. It's always the avatar of the Arizona Cardinals that I talk about. He's a nice guy. I've interviewed him. He's a sweet man who isn't equipped to have the job that he has, in my opinion. Now, I want to see on Sunday what the resolve of this organization is going to be. Budda Baker, out for the year. Colt McCoy is aiming to play, but this team is ravaged with injuries. And even though I don't make it an excuse, because I don't, as a reason why teams lose, because everybody has injuries until your quarterback goes down at least. I want to see the resolve, the stability of this organization, because this could be the penultimate game for Cliff Kingsbury as the head coach of the Arizona Cardinals. And I want to see what this team looks like. And just as a whole, it's not about players really at this point for me. Like, I feel like the Cardinals have the guys they're going to play with in the future. And, some guys are jockeying for roster positions. But at this point, and Aaron, before we go to the next, I got to ask you this. What is the upside of either of these teams winning this game?
This is the Jalen Carter, Bijan Robinson battle, right? The team that loses this game gets one step closer to one of the big time defensive linemen in his draft, like Jalen Carter, and the loser of this game, lowers their draft stock and may have to settle for Bijan Robinson at the top.
You're already camping outside of Bijan Robinson's house, right? Yeah. Like you're already giving him Locked On Falcons gear.
Yeah,
like you're juicing this up as much as you can. If the Cardinals draft Bijan Robinson, I may quit the podcast. No, I'm kidding. I love it, David Locke, Ross Jackson. But the Cardinals haven't eaten their vegetables enough to be able to draft a supreme talent, maybe a transcendent talent like Bijan Robinson is going to be. I'm more looking at both the lines or an edge rusher corner out of Georgia, something like that. But yeah, like it sucks because we can never talk about, this team should lose. Nobody's trying to lose. It's going to be who's trying to win the least that's going to lose this game. And do you see? So say Desmond Ridder comes out, throws for 350 and 3 touchdowns or something like that. Will you take the drop in stock to see that from him?
Look, Alex, stability at quarterback is the most important thing to have for your football team. If you have a stable foundation there, you can do a lot of good things in this league. And so I will take that over, 1 or 2 draft spots in a draft where, you don't know what these guys are going to be, right? We might wind up talking a little bit about Isaiah Simmons, but like everybody thought he was one of the top 2 talents in that draft class. And he's been up and down in the NFL. And, I'm sure some of that is not necessarily owed to a lack of talent and some of the development that's gone on in Arizona with him, but like the draft is a crapshoot. And so like, I will take the known stability at the quarterback position of having confidence and optimism in Desmond Ridder going into next year over, the unknown of what might be a world-class talent or maybe a guy that is out of the league in 3 years. You never know. That's true.
And I agree with that. Like I'm never rooting for, and I've never once said, draft position, sit everybody. Who are you going to sit? You got to start NFL. You're not going to start DeAndre Hopkins when he's healthy. What are we talking about here? So it's like, it's going to be a bonus to losing this game is you strengthen your draft position, but you never want to root for anything like that. It's just karmic, and you want to win as many games as you possibly can always.
Yeah. Yeah. And, maybe you wind up, getting, I don't know, Aaron Donald or something at the 14th overall draft selection, or JJ Watt at the 11th overall draft selection. And it all works out in the long run. TJ Watt is a player that Falcon fans, lament because they had a shot at him at 26 overall back in that 2017 draft. And he's wound up to be one of the best defensive players in the league. So it's one of those things that you just never know, and take the known and worry about the unknown at a later date. But we will worry about some of the key matchups later on today's crossover Thursday, guys. And we'll get into all of that as we continue this episode here on Locked On Falcons and Locked On Cardinals.
Yeah, and this episode is brought to you by Audible. Audible is releasing a slate of new football podcasts that we're sure you're going to love because it's football, man. That's why you'll be able to find an episode of The League available as a bonus podcast, a bonus episode on Locked On NFL, narrated by Super Bowl champion and legendary smack talker Richard Sherman, and sports broadcaster and rising star Taylor Rooks. Taylor Rooks is an absolute, she's so good. The League is an 8-part docuseries about the most bizarre, inspirational, and unlikely stories connected to America's favorite sport, pro football. You won't want to miss these untold stories spanning from the 1940s through the present. Our bonus episode is called The Way of the Cowboy, and is the incredible story of how the 1977 Dallas Cowboys brought in Bruce Lee's protege to teach their defense martial arts, ushering in a new approach to the way the league trained. Each story offers equal parts history, entertainment, and social commentary. Go over to Locked On NFL right now for a bonus episode of the league, or catch the full series wherever you get your podcasts. Available now. Audible. Get in the game.
So we're continuing today's Crossover Thursday presented by Prize Picks. We're going to get into some of these key matchups headed into this Week 17 game that, as Alex put it, no one is necessarily super invested in either team winning, but we want to thank you guys for making Locked On Falcons and Locked On Cardinals your first listen each and every day. But for your second listen, why not check out the Locked On Sports Today podcast? Go behind the scenes and behind the scoreboard with the stories that really matter that only Locked On can provide on Locked On Sports Today. Subscribe to it on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. So Alex, for you, as we just discussed, I know you're not super invested in this game and the outcomes, but what are some of the things that you will be watching on Sunday in one of these key matchups?
There's always growth. There's always growth for these teams, and I just want to see penalties, a lack thereof on offense, little things like that. Like, these are keys to victory for any team, and it's something it's kind of the Cardinals have struggled with over the last couple of years. Offensive penalties, I believe they're leading the league in offensive penalties this year. Obviously, Kyler Murray is not going to play. Colt McCoy is in line to start at this point if he completely is removed from concussion protocol. One big thing that I'm looking for is James Conner, because James Conner, and it sucks, but I don't know when this started. I think the NBA did this, but once you sign a big contract, and it's different for different positions in different sports, you then become a trade asset in some capacity. That's now on the table. If you need cap relief, if you want to get away from money that's not necessarily guaranteed unless certain things are hit. James Conner signed that in the offseason. And James Conner has shown that he's still James Conner when he's healthy. Not what he was last year with the massive amount of touchdowns, but if he can be a staple for this team and stay healthy and show that he, week in and week out, to use that cliche that I hate, just can ball out and be a staple for this offense moving forward, then you can say, you know what? He's 26. He's going to play out this contract. Maybe we'll draft a running back in the 4th or 5th round this year, but you're not going to need to look for a running back this offseason. And I feel like if the offense is going to be the strength of this team, you've got Hollywood Brown, you've got DeAndre Hopkins. There's not a real litmus test right now because you're on your backup quarterback. But if you have James Conner, that's your four-headed monster with Kyler Murray moving forward. And I feel like that's something that, regardless of outcome of game, if he can continue to show carries, that he's more of a LeGarrette Blount than a Ray Rice towards the end of his career, you can be looking at something for the future that you can just set and forget, which is important for all franchises. What about you? In flux, same thing, no playoffs, young quarterback. Is it outside of Desmond Ridder? Is it more defensive? What are you looking at for keys to victory here?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Falcons just played their style of football, and I think it's going to be a lot more favorable against the Cardinals, who don't sport a world-class defense, this week than it has been the last couple of weeks, which is they're going to run the football. They'll be hopefully somewhat efficient throwing the ball, hopefully a little bit more efficient than they have been the last couple of weeks, now that Ritter's gotten some more reps. And maybe this is a game where the Falcons defense doesn't look like terrible, and they haven't been awful these last couple of weeks, but it's just been a lot of up and down. And James Conner's probably going to look good against this Falcons run defense that really hasn't stopped anybody. But I'm kind of hoping, after a week where they did not hit Tyler Huntley one time in that game and maybe got 2 or 3 pressures in the entire game against Baltimore last week, that the pass rush will actually look decent, because they're going up against a Cardinals offensive line that has been decimated by injuries and basically has just been glued together with not even duct tape, masking tape or whatever. And Colt McCoy coming back, he's been a guy, I know Arizona is not really about throwing the ball down the field without Kyler Murray in the lineup, and they're kind of dinking and dunking, getting the ball out quick, all that sort of stuff. But when teams have been able to get pressure on Colt McCoy, it does seem like they are able to get him on the ground a lot more easy than it has been the case with either Kyler Murray or Trace McSorley. So I'm looking forward to the Falcons, adding to their extremely low total of sacks that they've generated over the last 2 years, and maybe they get 1 or 2 in this game, and it's like, okay, that's something. I'll take that, because that's going to be an area where this team is really going to revamp this offseason. But at least maybe Grady Jarrett, maybe Arnold Ebiketie, some of the pieces that you like in terms of their pass rush will have a nice day that will remind you, like, okay, we're not starting absolutely from scratch. We got some pieces there. So that's what I'm kind of looking forward to in this game.
Sure. Now I want to ask, because before he skyrocketed up draft boards, Drake London was looked at as a target for the Cardinals at 23. Before all the crazies with Hollywood Brown, before he got taken much higher. What is his, aside from injuries, he had a slow start. Drake London hasn't had the Christian Watson pop. And I know that there's quarterback has a lot to do with that. Christian Watson went from 0 to a million in 1 second flat in like 5 touchdowns in 3 games or something out of nowhere. Drake London has been more consistently, I don't know, towards the top of his own team's receiving yard list at the end of a game. Like, how would you grade when he's on the field this year, his rookie season?
Yeah, I mean, the last couple of weeks with Ridder at the helm, that connection between him and Drake London has been very strong. Like, it's basically the Drake London show when the Falcons are throwing the football. It's like Ridder's looking at London and then reluctantly will go to his next progression and throw the ball to Anthony Ferkser or Olave Zaccheaus, and so it's just like, if London's open, I'm throwing it. If he's down there, he's down there somewhere, I'm throwing it. That's basically Desmond Ridder's philosophy. And you haven't seen it necessarily you've seen it translate with a bunch of targets, catches, yards the last couple of weeks, but it hasn't translated into touchdowns because the Falcons just haven't been that efficient in the red zone the last couple of games. And that was especially true last week. But it's notable the difference between that rapport with Drake London and Desmond Ridder than it was with Marcus Mariota, where it was just nothing. They just seemed to be speaking completely 2 different languages when it came to trying to connect on this offense, towards the end of those that tenure by Marcus Mariota. So, I want to see Drake London, find the end zone this week. But we'll just sort of have to see. But I think you'll see a lot of Drake London on Sunday.
Yeah. And he's just, at US, it's just, they're becoming wide receiver U. It's just kind of a thing where it's just, and it's just fun to see. And like, for me, that name is Greg Dortch this year, so like with keys to victory, it's crazy. Like, Rondale Moore is supposed to be doing what Greg Dortch is doing. So when we talk about keys to victory, I know we're veering off a little bit here. Greg Dortch has been, when he's been given the opportunity, and I don't know if this is a poor testament to Cliff Kingsbury's, inability to put him on the field in a position to succeed, or if it's just he fills in with injury, that Greg Dortch is living Rondale Moore's life. Like, that's what's supposed to be. Rondale Moore, by all metrics, is more talented than Greg Dortch. When Greg Dortch gets 7 or 8 targets a game, he's putting up wide receiver 2 numbers. So with Drake London, I know that he's a rookie. Greg Dortch may as well be for getting the opportunity that he's getting now when he wasn't necessarily getting it elsewhere. He was a darling in camp, and he's actually performed. And it's like, how do you not roster this guy for the next 3 or 4 years at this point? Like, they're forcing the hand of Michael Bidwell to pay him and to maybe keep an extra wide receiver, because all he does is fill in. He's like, here you go. Here's your Atlanta Falcons reference. He's like Harry Douglas when Roddy White or Julio Jones would go down. It's like, it doesn't matter. Like the Marvin Jones in Cincinnati before he went to Detroit. Like, that's what Greg Dortch has been. He's been the Harry Douglas of the Arizona Cardinals this season.
Yeah, and I'll be curious to see if we see a lot of Greg Dortch, getting featured, because that probably means that DeAndre Hopkins is not getting featured, which was the case last week, where I think he caught like 1 pass on like 10 targets or something. Like, him and Trace McSorley, similar to what we're talking about with London and Mariota, seem to not be on the same page. So, one of those matchups I'm curious is AJ Terrell testing himself against DeAndre Hopkins. Like, that's been a storyline throughout the season where it's been number 1 receiver, and some weeks AJ Terrell has looked very good and some weeks not so good. And this is just going to be another litmus test because, we're probably a year or two away from needing to make a decision on AJ Terrell's, second contract. And the more sort of games like this where he can rack up going up against, the elite receivers in the league. And I know DeAndre Hopkins is not, in his prime at this point in his career. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I say something? But like, he's still a very, very good player, right? Like, he may not be the guy that you're putting up there when I say that as the number one receiver in the league, which he was for like 5 or 6 years. It was him and Julio that were kind of neck and neck in that conversation for several years there. But he's still a very good player that can hurt you. So I'll be curious to see if AJ Terrell can test himself against Hopkins, and if he does do a good job, does that mean someone like a Greg Dortch, is the guy that's kind of the featured guy along with James Conner this Sunday? And, for those of you that are doing your prize picks, maybe that's a little bit of a hint for, maybe some projections that you may or may not take. But on that note, we'll sort of turn the page, talk a little bit about sort of our final predictions for this game as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. But before we get there, guys, I want to tell you about our friends over at BetOnline, the number one source for your sports betting info, stats, news, analysis. And since I know you love podcasts about sports, you can also find those at betonline.net. And if you're looking for this week's action and lines, you can find that, of course, but it's not just lines on the NFL. You got lines on basketball, soccer, esports, right? Tennis, anything you can think of, professional, amateur leagues, everyone out there, whether it's American sports, Icelandic sports, Brazilian sports, Australian sports, wherever you are on the planet, you can find that coverage in those lines and odds and trends over at betonline.net. So go head to the website today, use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. And guys, on a more serious note, did you know that driving high is considered driving under the influence? That's right. Driving under the influence of marijuana is against the law in every state, even in states where marijuana is legal. That means driving high could get you a DUI. And if you don't think law enforcement officers can tell when you're driving high, you're wrong. Your friends can tell, your coworkers can tell, even your parents can tell, everyone can tell. So what makes you think that law enforcement officers don't know when you're driving high? Driving under the influence of marijuana can slow your response time and change how you perceive time and speed. So even if you think you're fine to drive, when you're high, you're not. Because the bottom line is, if you feel different, you drive different. And driving high is driving under the influence. So remember, drive high, get a DUI paid for by NHTSA. So, Alex, as we wrap up today's episode, getting into some of these final score predictions, what for you is sort of your expectations for the outcome of this game, whether that's a final score prediction or anything? Where are you at with this game?
I feel like this is going to be a muck box of a game, if I can say that. I mean, it's going to be muddy. It's going to be a lot more investigatory of the offense from Atlanta's side than it is going to be from the Cardinals. I feel like we know what the offensive stencil is with Colt McCoy. Understand, you alluded to it earlier. Short passes, running the ball, controlling the clock, and we'll see. But I can't find 40 points in this game. Like, I just can't. And I feel like it's going to be a lot of we're working on things. We're working on things and see if these things will work. It's not going through the motions because these guys are professionals. Everybody's looking for the next contract and things like that. But I do think it's going to be a lot of James Conner, going to be some Keontae Ingram, and it's going to be a lot of short passes. Hopefully get Trey McBride, the second-round pick out of Colorado State, involved. But, selfishly, I just want Hollywood Brown to have 100 catches on Sunday. Like, we haven't gotten to see that this year, aside from the first handful of weeks. So I do think that the Cardinals will win on Sunday. I think it's going to be like 17-13 or something like that. It's going to be a tight match. It's going to be a fun game. I joke when I say a muck box. It's football. It's going to be fun to watch, and we're going to tell a lot. It's going to tell a lot about the future of both of these organizations.
Yeah, I feel like every Falcon game it seems like the last 6 weeks has been a low-scoring sort of affair. every Falcon game this season, outside of a handful, seem to come down to, who has the ball last and whether or not they can make the plays to go out there and win the game. I expect the exact same thing in this game. And I just looked it up. The line for this game is the Falcons are favored by 3.5. And so I think that's about what I kind of expect the Falcons to win this game on like a field goal or something like that. I do think the Falcons will win. I think this is their most winnable game. I think, as I said at the top, this is going to be kind of the biggest litmus test for Desmond Ridder, because if they lose this game to, a struggling Cardinals team with a backup quarterback and all the injuries that they're dealing with several of their, biggest playmakers out of the lineup, and Ridder does not play well, right? That's going to be a devastating blow, because, you can sit there and say, okay, well, he had his ups and downs against the Saints, but they're one of the better defenses in the league. He had his ups and downs against the Ravens. They're one of the better defenses in the league.
Right.
You can't really say that against the Arizona Cardinals, although they can do some things that can challenge him, like bring a lot of pressure, because we know Vance Joseph loves to dial up those blitzes. So I'll be curious to see how Ridder handles that in this game. But I think if he handles it well and the Falcons can do what they do, run the ball, and hopefully the defense doesn't let Trey McBride go off on them like they let Jawan Johnson go off on them a couple of weeks ago, and some of these other playmakers that the Cardinals have, in this dink and dunk offense under Colt McCoy. I feel like the Falcons will come away with the win. They've been a much better home team than they have been a road team. And so I expect to see, their best punch that they have under Desmond Ridder in this game. And hopefully that results in a win. So I'm thinking something like 2017 type of win for the Falcons on Sunday.
Yeah. And there's one storyline that, that I forgot to mention. Shame on me. I mean, this is JJ Watt's second to last game in the NFL. Yeah. So what he's going to want to do is he's going to be, foaming at the mouth like the kids from Little Giants when they put the antacid in their mouth, coming after a rookie quarterback. He only has so many lessons that he can teach left. One of them, and he has two young quarterbacks that he's playing against in Desmond Ridder and Brock Purdy in Week 18. So let's see if JJ Watt has been playing like a man possessed the last 3 or 4 weeks, and now you kind of realize, like, oh, because he knew that this was it. Like, all of the juice, he's going to run all the way until on empty, because it's going to be the last 2 games. That's probably like an honorable mention storyline. It's not going to matter for the future of the Arizona Cardinals, but it's going to be a hell of a lot of fun to watch on Sunday.
Absolutely. And he'll be going up probably a lot against Chris Lindstrom, the Falcons Pro Bowl right guard. And so that will be a fun battle between those two guys to sort of see, what sort of veteran savvy that JJ Watt can pull to rile up the Pro Bowl right guard and Chris Lindstrom, or if Chris Lindstrom comes out on top and says, we're turning the page on you, JJ. We'll send you into an early retirement on Sunday. So we'll see how that all breaks on Sunday. We'll of course have you guys covered, for the rest of this week, as well as after that game on Locked On Falcons and Locked On Cardinals. So for Alex Clancy of Locked On Cardinals, myself for Locked On Falcons, we thank you guys for making us your first listen. Always check out the Locked On Podcast Network for your second listens. And of course, Locked On Sports Today has you covered. All the sports stories that you need in under 25 minutes over there with Peter Bukowski of Locked On Sports Today. Subscribe to it on all the same podcast platforms that you can find Locked On Falcons and Locked On Cardinals. So guys, thanks for joining us for another Crossover Thursday presented by Prize Picks. That's going to do it for us here. Really appreciate it. Until then.